From somewhere in southern Rhode Island, it's the Nolan Carr Night Show starring Nolan Carr, inviting you to join him and his guest this week, David Beard. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here he is. Here's Nolan. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another exciting edition of the show here on the Nolan Carr at Night Show. As always, if you've enjoyed episodes like this, because why the heck wouldn't you? Do us a favor by following us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all that fun jazz. Follow us on YouTube, on the audio platform. Subscribe, comment, share all that fun jazz to continue to grow the program. Because I say all that, we have a great guest on today. Our guest this week, David Beard, has spent the last few decades carefully curating the premier one-stop shop for all things Beach Boys through his magazine, Endless Summer Quarterly, which ranges from album dissections, film and television, and other noteworthy Beach Boys related and adjacent topics. When he's not writing liner notes, coffee table books, or hosting a podcast that brings nothing less than good vibrations, you can find the Tar Heel State's most favorite son running the show, presenting one of the best quality reads in ESQ. It's an honor to have David on the show this week, not only as a guest, but as a return guest to talk about this quarter's issue of ESQ. There's part two of Brian Wilson Productions, which came out recently. David, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Well, thank you for having me back. It's been a while.
Yeah. Yes, it has been a while, but it's all good things come back at one point or another, so it's a
I'm like
treat.
I'm like a boomerang.
Yeah, Boomerang, it comes back with rewards being this wonderful addition of your product. I want to ask you this first question before I say how much I enjoy it. My first question was this topic, as I mentioned in the intro, you discuss albums in particular sometimes or movies. I really enjoyed the American Family movie issue that you did a few issues ago, or no, American Band.
American Band, yeah, the '85
American Band,
documentary.
that
Yeah,
was a favorite one of mine. Then of course the Ron Altback ones, but this one, unlike those, is a very niche and very particular topic to discuss. We were talking about not just Brian Wilson Productions, but outside solo ones. So for you, how did you come up and come to a mindset of this was important to tell at this period in ESQ's history after everything you covered beforehand?
that's a good question. So what I always ask myself whenever I'm working on the magazine, in any given point of a year or any given year, is what haven't I done yet? What haven't I explored yet in the Beach Boys 60 plus year history, 70 years now, I guess. They've been around for so long, and what and really there's nothing, the fact that they're Mike Love and Bruce Johnston tours the Beach Boys and Al Jardine is out doing shows and Brian stopped touring. But I don't really, there's not, what we'd like to do in the news section is we talk about what's going on now.
Yeah,
Um, but so I'm always, when I ask myself, what haven't I done with the magazine that I'd like to do? It's typically a reflection of probably 2012 when they reunited and then backwards because it's a Beach Boys publication. So I'm always asking and looking at different facets of their career, trying to get into things that haven't really been explored.
sure.
And um, I hope I'm telling you all these different things in correct order. So I think in early 2024, Rolling Stone's Andy Green posted a story on their website about Fred Vale's Cows in the Pasture album that Brian had worked on, I think, in April of 1970 with Fred. And it was, and then of course, I think that's going to come out later this year, hopefully. And so what that kind of started me thinking about was Brian Wilson Productions. And I went back in spring of 2011. We published a magazine that had, at that time, Mike, Bruce Johnston, and Al Jardine had gotten together for the Ronald Reagan centennial. And Nancy Reagan was still alive at that time. That was leading up to the 2012 reunion. And that was news. So Mike ended up being on the cover. But at the bottom, going across the bottom, there was this neat thing where I wrote, I put Brian from 63 with Brian plus Brian Wilson Productions. And the interviews in there were with Sharon Marie, and who's one act that Brian produced, and Vicky Coker, who's she went on to become a professional actress as Victoria Hale. So Vicky Coker and Sharon Marie, and these interviews, especially the Sharon Marie interview, were very, very good. Andrew Doe, for people who don't know that name, I would point you to the ESQ website. It's the easy way to find him is ESQUARTERLY.com. And when you get there, click the About button. And then you'll go down and you'll see Andrew's face. If you click on his face, it'll take you right to his Bellagio website. And then I recommend you go to the shows and sessions, and it just takes you through the group's history of any given year, not just the different performances they have, but also the sessions they were working on. And it's a great kind of online encyclopedia if you really want to get into it. So Andrew had done. There's a guy I never met. His name was Derek Bill. Derek is one of those great collectors, bootleggers, collectors back in the day. And I don't know what year he passed on or really much about him other than he was the one who reached out to Sharon Marie, found her, put her in touch with Andrew Doe. Andrew Doe did this great interview. Well, I started this idea of Brian Wilson Productions, and I thought, well, gosh, I'm going to look around in all the stuff I've collected. And I went and I have there's this, I don't know how rare it is, but it's a box set of, I think, 4 LPs. And the fourth LP is just Brian Wilson Productions. And there's a booklet in it. So I think it's from the early 80s. And Peter Riem, who's a pretty good historian in his own right, he had written the liner notes, and it had to do with the group, the Survivors. And mistakenly in those notes, Peter claims that the Survivors were actually the Beach Boys. And I thought, oh gosh, that's weird. So then I went online and I'm Googling because we can find anything
Yeah.
we want these days, right? Because it's at our fingertips. Well, that was what really astounded me is I Googled and I was looking for these people that I was reading, that I had this list of names based on Andrew's website. I went through Andrew's website, used that as kind of a beginning point, had these 2 interviews with Vicky and Sharon, knew Fred's album would be coming soon. And then, of course, I have interviews with Dean Torrance of Jan and Dean. And I just thought, okay, there's something a little meaty here.
Sure. Yeah.
And I started looking, and I was really surprised that there's not much out there. And what's out there isn't really complete or accurate. And as I'm talking about this, I'm going to just be sure to say, as much as I've put together in the 2 issues, I'm sure there's still stuff that we don't know because I feel like I pulled some layers back. I've gotten into certain things, and I really love what I found in my exploration of these interviews. But I'm sure there's still elements, little tidbits here or there, more minutia that we don't know. But so I just thought, gosh, this is pretty interesting that as much as that is at our that's just so available these days that this stuff isn't out there. So then I went and grabbed the Genesis book, The Beach Boys by the Beach Boys. I thumbed through there. There's nothing in there. I just thought, how is this possible that Brian Wilson that we know so little about, as much as we know about his career as a Beach Boy, that we know so little about his work outside the Beach Boys in these really informed and transformative years in his career. And that's really, the Beach Boys basically start becoming a group in the fall of '61. They have a very local moderate hit with Surfin'. So as he gets into '62, things begin to happen. And one of the things that I really think it's important, and when I do anything, whether I'm doing one of the magazines about a well-known album by the Beach Boys, let's say Pet Sounds, or if I'm doing something like what I did here, I'm always careful to not put what I think occurred into what I'm doing.
Sure.
I try to take the information at hand, understand the circumstances of the moment or the time in any given calendar year, whether it's '62, '63, whatever it is. And I try to let the person that I'm interviewing give me as much of their memories and their experience as possible to let that be the story so that I'm not the I like this song more than I like this song. So surely Brian's intention here was to make a hit record. That that's we I think fans do that a lot
Yeah.
when we really like as an example, I became a Jan and Dean fan first. I watched the TV movie sometime I think in early 1980, Dead Man's Curve. That introduced me to the genre of surf music and cars and surfing. And I went out and bought the Jan and Dean anthology album. That led me to, because in that movie, in that TV movie, Mike Love, Bruce Johnson, and Dick Clark make a cameo at the very end. So I just thought, oh, those are the Beach Boys, okay. And then the Jan and Dean anthology album had this great book. It was a two-record set and had this great booklet in the middle that was written by Dave Marsh of Cream magazine, and it told all about all this Brian Wilson. And I pulled out the records and started looking at writing credits. Again, keep in mind we didn't have internet.
Sure.
This was just if you had books, you could read books. You'd have to kind of discern and investigate for yourself to kind of work through how things were connected. And that's what turned me on to the Beach Boys. And for the longest time, probably for the first 5 years of me being a Jan and Dean / Beach Boy fan, I was really only interested in. I only remember being interested in the hits.
Sure.
I wasn't really intrigued by the more artistic stuff or anything else. I just liked the songs that were fun to sing along to or
Sure.
dance to. So it's one of the things that I think I often see fans kind of formulating in their minds when they're talking about any given period of any given group, as a matter of fact. And that is, oh, my favorite song by the Beach Boys we're just going to say I Get Around.
Yeah.
Surely Brian and Mike, when they wrote I Get Around, they knew it was going to be a hit. And so, and they create this whole kind of mythical storyline to
Yeah.
go with because they like that song. And I like a lot of stuff, but I don't get out ahead of the actual story and letting the person tell the story and then formulating the foundation of whatever it is after the fact,
Sure.
letting it breathe, letting it become what it's supposed to be. And that was incredible. So lo and behold, I got this plan going and I get this random email from Sharon Marie because I had been in touch with her back in 2011 when even though I had not done that interview and Andrew had, we had always had each other's contact information. Out of the blue, I get an email from her saying, hey, how do I get more of the spring 2011 USQs? And I said, you're not going to believe this. I'm actually working on taking your interview from 2011 and putting it into a new issue because I want to do a full blown book just of Brian's production work outside of the Beach Boys. And another quality to what I was doing, another element of what I was doing was I wanted Brian's children, so Carney and Wendy, plus all his adoptive children from his second marriage, to be able to have a keepsake on their dad of stuff that maybe people don't talk about every day.
Sure.
Right. So I looked at this as another opportunity to show them, hey, yeah, we know all about our dad as this greatest hits guy who changed music and revolutionized music,
Yeah.
but to see these other things he was doing peripherally and how he took informed moments where he gleaned something, where he picked up something, and how that worked into what he would do next each and every time, I thought was really critical and important because I really looked at it that way from the familial standpoint of wanting his kids to have like a family keepsake to go,
Sure.
oh, look what else dad did, you know.
Yeah. Oh, I
So
didn't know he did that. Yeah.
yeah. So what ended up happening is I did follow up interviews with Sharon, and I had a little supplemental stuff there, but it wasn't much. Andrew Doe's interview with her was so fleshed out and so good. There was a few things that I added here and there, but just very, very little. With Vicky, I interviewed her and came up with questions that really that one hadn't been fleshed out. That interview originally had been done by Lee Dempsey, who's my business partner for the ESQ, and his questions were more kind of specific about the surfer moon, which turned into the summer moon, and how she ended up with a copy. Does she still have the copy? It was more kind of that original interview was more focused on through a collector's eyes.
Sure.
And Lee has an incredible collection. So talking to Vicky this time was really enlightening because I asked her all sorts of questions about life with Brian. And then the one that came forward that just surprised me was Cheryl Pomeroy, who was Sherry of Bob and Sherry.
Uh,
And no one has ever interviewed her, to my knowledge. So getting her, and I can't remember how I found her. I think I found her on Facebook. I think we're Facebook friends. And I think that's how it happened, seems to me. It was very interesting to discover and have these people and then put them in chronological order. So as best I could, because there's overlapping dates here and there, but I wanted I wanted the readers in these two volumes to be able to kind of follow Brian's, for lack of a better word, transcendence,
sure.
and how he was using working on one thing, the Surfer Moon, which, if you're a Beach Boy fan, you've heard the Surfer Moon. I believe it came out on their Surf and Safari album. Uh, if not that one, then maybe it's one of the first three albums
Sure.
it came off of. But so Surfer Moon was Bob and Sherry, and it was actually on. I'm really getting into minutia here. It was actually the record labels is the Hawthorne label, which was the address where Murray and Audrey lived.
Ah, okay.
And then Vicky comes in. Again, little tiny things like everywhere I read where I could find something, Bob and Sherry broke up because they would have relationship problems or something. Well, I did the interview with Cheryl, and she's telling me we never even dated. Bob was dating my best friend Ann Williamson, and then she put all that together. So I like being able to kind of straighten out history. That to me is an important element of what I do. Is kind of, even if it's a little thing like misinformation about relationships and why something stopped and something else started. But the great thing was the artifacts that were kind of coming, and which you got to see, which was like the Brian Wilson handwritten note for
Yeah.
Vicky that he put under her windshield wiper on her car when he moved from the Crenshaw Boulevard apartment to 108th Street, and he said, "Sold to the boy in the Grand Prix." And then having Dave Nolan, the interview I did with Dave Nolan was so enriching because he's one of the members of the survivors. He moved in right next to Brian on Crenshaw Boulevard. Brian lived with Bob Norberg, and I know you know this, but just for anybody who might be watching, I'm not going to give away too much because these magazines are a treasure trove.
Sure.
Um, but it just is so great to see. And again, one of the things I touched on was we don't get all the information. So we don't know exactly when Brian moved out of his parents' house, but we know by the fall of 62, he's living in an apartment. We know by early 63, January, February timeline, he has moved into this house because Dave Nolan talks about March of 63, he goes to the house. I think I left that in there. Well, no, what I know, he mentioned that Mike Love lived in the house. And Mike Love was getting a separation and divorce in March of 63 from his wife. So we know that's the timeline. Um, and Al was coming over. So I love reading those things but in the meantime, Brian is continuing this outside production work.
Yeah.
And so we interview Brian's first wife, Marilyn, who's the
Yeah.
mother of Carney and Wendy Wilson from Wilson Phillips. And I interviewed Ginger Blake, who was Marilyn's cousin from the Honeys. The two of them were from the Honeys. And I think all these things were so important So having the Sharon Marie, having the Vicky Coker interviews, and then adding these other interviews really helped me create this beautiful. And again, when I started it, I thought I'll have one magazine that I can do a Brian Wilson.
Sure.
It just was so great to see it blossom into this two-volume set. And then Paul Peterson, of all people, I got a hold of him. Now it was just one page, but it was still nice to be able to include him
Sure.
and understand the connection, which was through Lou Adler, as it turned out. But that's what I like. And so really the big thing that I got from doing this, because I asked it in the Honeys interviews, my gosh, Brian was doing so much at such a pace. Is this why he burned out? And they said no, he was just on fire. And Nolan, for the first time, I never thought about it this way. I think Brian, for those who may not know, in December of '64, Brian was with the Beach Boys on a flight to Houston, Texas, to do a show, and it's been documented, well documented, that he had a what they called a nervous breakdown on the plane. They played the show, and then he came back after that, and they canceled one of the shows. Um, I think that Brian may have done that. I'm not going to speak to whether or not it was a true response and
Sure.
reaction. I wasn't there, but what I looked at going to look at based on Andrew's site again is I noticed that in June and July of '64, the Beach Boys do the All Summer Long and the Christmas album together. Then it isn't until October of '64 that Brian works with Glenn Campbell for the first time on Guess I'm Dumb. Then it appears around November, December '64 that he works on Kiss Me Baby, which ends up on the Today album. There's not a lot of recording in that whole pocket of time, other than they do the concert. They do the concert album in
Sure.
August, I think August, September. But Brian's not in the studio working. And looking at the amount of work that he had done by the end of, July of '64, for him not to be in the studio, still going, and considering the stuff that he had put together
Yeah.
and released, which was amazing stuff. I mean, Don't Worry Baby, One for the Sun, fun, fun, fun. Then all summer long, I Get Around. I mean, it was getting better and better and better.
Sure.
Um, I think that must have truly been a frustration for him. They went to Europe on tour. I've seen, everybody has seen photos of that tour of the guys. In fact, they ended up on the California Girls picture sleeve, them being on tour over there. So I think he had a good time visiting Europe. But I think the problem is for a guy who's a songwriter, who's a studio rat, kind of the opposite of his cousin Mike Love, who's a tour rat, right?
Yeah.
That's their wheelhouse. For a guy who's a studio rat, wants to be in the studio, wants to be expanding and transforming. So he is transforming music, but I don't think he's setting out to transform music.
Sure.
See, so this is the effect of what he did, what happened. But I don't think Brian at any point, see, we can say, well, what was he thinking? What was he doing? All we know is the result. And so I think everything led to him being really informed. And so what I'm going to do in the summer edition, because I wasn't really able to do it in those two volumes, although I did a sidebar at the end of my interview with Cheryl Pomeroy of the Gary Usher production, which was October of '62, which appears to be the first time Brian does an outside production. And it's with Rachel. It's Rachel and the Revolution. No, it's
Uh,
Rachel and the Revolvers.
uh,
Song Revolution and Number One are the flip sides, and that's where Gary and Brian specifically go and find a black female recording artist.
uh,
Specifically, that's what they want.
hmm.
It's interesting to me. So that was another discovery for me is Brian's love of rhythm and blues, because you don't really get that from Brian as a Beach Boy until you get to Wild Honey. And when people talk about 1967's Wild Honey album, whether they like it or not, I'm not getting into, but they typically will say, "Oh, well, that was really Carl because Carl was into R&B." That's
Yeah.
true. That's true. but people don't recognize that Brian too was into R&B, and so this exploration helped me realize that more. How much Brian actually loved R&B too, just through that one example. So in the summer edition, I'm going to be with Stephen J. McParland. He's an Australian author. He's got a website with digital books that are
Yeah.
PDFs. I mean, just great deep resource of all sorts of things. And he's got one book that's just about Gary Usher working with Brian. And so I've got his permission to kind of go through and dissect certain parts to kind of make a Gary Usher ESQ for the summer
Sure.
edition. And so that we can give that attention, because I think it's important to give that attention to understand how Brian was able to, again, be informed. Gary, by the early '60s, he had been in music a little bit, so he understood more about publishing and licensing than Brian, and certainly Brian's father, Murray Wilson, had any, you know, understanding of.
Yeah.
Murray, even though he had written a song that was covered called Two Step Sidestep, he didn't really have a business acumen for the music business. He did
Yeah.
not possess that. And most people don't. The Beatles didn't. No, very few times do you read in music history. I can think of one. There's very few times in music history do you ever read about a successful group who, that knew what they were doing out of the gate?
Yeah.
Most groups get into it because they love music and then they become successful as
Sure.
musicians. They're not successful as businessmen. That
Yeah.
happens. That happens after they get screwed by somebody. Um, but Bob Gaudio of the Four Seasons is one examples that I can. Oh, and ABBA, from what I understand, who understood the business side of music publishing when they kind of walked in the door, and understood from the very beginning how to publish and license and everything to cover their backs so they wouldn't be getting taken advantage of.
Sure.
And Gary Usher had that background by the time he met Brian, and I think he really helped inform the Beach Boys as a whole and Brian as a whole from that side of things, because Brian and the Beach Boys, just again, think of how innocent this is. Brian's younger brother Dennis says, "Let's write a song about surfing." Okay, and that's what they do.
Yeah.
It's not, oh, let's who do we sign a contract with or anything else like that. It's
What's
just,
my royalty percentage?
that's what I wrote. It's, Brian, if you're going to write that song, make sure I get a percentage.
Yeah.
There is no thought like that. So they create this song, and then the next thing you know, there's interest, and God bless their dad, Brian, Dennis, and Carl's father, Murray. Even though he was in a little over his head with the business side, if it had not been for him, they never, I don't know, they would have
Sure.
been signed. So he was, he fought tooth and nail to get them on a record label and managed to get them on Capitol Records. But then the Beatles came, so that's a whole nother thing for
Yeah.
another time. But I think it's fascinating to look at, how Brian would take something, work on something, and 9 times out of 10, it would end up as a Beach Boys record.
Yeah.
Even though with these outside productions, I mean, he did, as an example, as you read, the Survivors. He worked with them. He did a song called "The Witch Stand," and I want to recommend to anyone on YouTube, look up Daelims. It's Daelims, which is smile ad spelled backwards, and type in "Witch Stand" once you get to his channel.
Not WITCH, WICH.
Yes, that's right. Like sandwich. Because there was a place called the Witch Stand out in
Oh, yeah.
California. They were growing up in Hawthorne. And check it out. It's Dave Nolan of the Survivors heard it and sent me an email and said, "This is great." So that was all I needed to know
Yeah.
about the recreation of that. Because Dave, the Master True Witch Stand, which was the first song, that in itself is such an interesting history. The survivors were Bob Norberg, Brian's roommate, Dave Nolan, who lived right next door at Crenshaw Boulevard Apartments, and then another buddy of theirs, Rich Alarian. And Rich apparently helped Brian with some songs that ended up on Beach Boys albums. And Brian said, he probably said this because of his dad, and I'm not sure exactly what he said, but the conversation must have been, well, listen, I'm not going to give you credit on the songs, but I will record some stuff with you guys, and then I'll get you. I'm going to try to get you a contract with Capitol
Sure.
Records. I'll do this song Witchstand with you, and then we'll go down and that whole story in Dave's interview was great. But then I guess the feedback was sounds like too much like the Beach Boys. So then Brian's so upset that he decides, well, okay, I'll do something that doesn't sound like us. He specifically does something that sounds like Dion on the Belmonts, and it's called Pamela Jean.
Hmm.
And Brian's basically a member of the Survivors. I mean, for
Yeah.
all intents and purposes, he is. But so he does this Pamela Jean, that becomes the single, but then he uses it again anyways as Car Crazy Cutie. So almost 9 times out of, well, I don't know what the correct percentage is, but almost always Brian would take a piece or glean, like "Thinking About You, Baby" by Sharon Marie would eventually become "Darling."
Okay.
So he was always hanging on to bits and pieces of stuff. And the other thing I really liked seeing and learning and exploring was Sharon Marie is such a really significant element, part, and surprise to me in that whole story where you have Brian and his dad, based on Brian's handwritten note to Sharon, which I included. He and his father, Murray, are a production team, which I've never read
Hmm.
anywhere, ever. That was a surprise. And of course, that obviously didn't happen. Because by the time he wrote that letter to her in 64, early 64, her second single, so this is what was weird. First single comes out October of 63, second one, June of 64. And by June of 64, the Beach Boys are so hot that I think that's why that dissolved. And also in that timeline, somewhere in that, let's say between, I can't remember off the top of my head, but during the I Get Around session, I think it was, but during the All Summer Long album recording sessions, that's when Mike and Brian pull Murray aside and say, we are letting you go. And however that conversation, we're firing you as our manager. We don't need you.
Yeah.
And I wish they had gotten him out of their publishing too, because Murray would go on to sell the songs later, and that was a whole mess. But it, so that's so interesting to me and significant to me that Brian and Murray were going to be a production
Hmm.
team, and that Mike was Sharon Murray's manager,
Hmm.
and that's so it was almost and then the photos. They do a whole photo shoot in October of '63 with Carl Engman, I'm got A&R guy at Capitol. I don't know if that was his title, but it's him, Brian, Mike, and Sharon Marie in these post photos. And then Dennis and Carl are in some with them too.
Hmm.
And it's like, what's going on here?
Is she the next Beach Boy?
Well, right. So what were they thinking? Would she be an opening act? Well, the Beach Boys would be on stage and they would play for her? Because this is in that moment of time where the transition of David Marks coming out and Al Jardine coming back in was happening. So we don't know. See, that's one of the unanswered, and Sharon
Yeah.
doesn't. Sharon
Huh.
doesn't know. So that's one of those other weird kind of interesting moments in time in their career. I can't imagine they were going to be the Beach Boys plus one or
Yeah.
Sharon Marie, the Beach Boys featuring Sharon Marie or whatever it would have been. I can't imagine they were going to go down that road, which is why I think maybe it was more the best I can glean from that is that it was a promotional thing to help kind of like look the Beatles towards the end before they broke up in the late 60s around 69 70 they had brought in outside acts. They brought in James Taylor, they brought
Yeah.
in Badfinger, right? They were trying to kind of branch out to a wider umbrella, and so I think that's kind of what was going on at this point for Brian and Mike, trying to find out what's the extent of our ambition, what can we do, because again, the Beach Boys went on to be really successful.
Yes.
But in October of 63, did they know that? No.
No.
So that's what I think was going on here. They're in the moment. These are the circumstances. This is what we're doing right now, and then just trying to what happens next. Gosh, by the time you get to the beginning of 64, you have "Don't Worry, Baby," "Fun, Fun, Fun," and "The Warmth of the Sun," and it's like, well, why would you have any time to do anything else?
Yeah.
And that's what I can best absorb from all of these interviews was that the Beach Boys just became too successful that for Brian to really be putting his attention on anything else. But he would still kind of do it sporadically because we have Glenn Campbell. I think June of '65 comes out with "Guess I'm Dumb." Uh, is that right? I think so. And that was really a precursor to Pet Sounds.
Yeah.
Uh, it was a really true reflection of the material of side two of the Today album. And Brian's still going down that self exploratory path, where he was expressing himself through music to the point where it's, Fleetwood Mac would do it later. The Mamas and Papas did it very well. I think actually the Mamas and Papas to me are the first. We have Fleetwood Mac Rumors that did very well in the '70s, but I think Mamas and Papas were the first one to put their stuff on a record
Yeah.
in terms of what they were going through. But Brian was really one of the first to take music, be experimental with it, and allow who he was to kind of leak into the storytelling and lyrical element of, what the listener would end up hearing.
Sure. You talked about it in the issue and you've mentioned it here, but you have something in this current one, Glenn Campbell, where the interview's from the early 2000s. He obviously has now passed away. He's been passed away for the last few years. But you revisit with Sharon Marie an interview you mentioned from 2011 to now 2024 or 2025. For you as a writer, but also as a fan of this history, telling the story for others, how important is it for certain issues like this one to revisit interviews and bring new stuff to it to widen the whole story?
It's invaluable. Like it with Vicky, as I said, I added a lot of stuff to her interview. I'm grateful that these, when you're talking about some people, they're still here, that you can
Yeah,
still talk to them, that they still have these memories, that they're still very vivid memories. Um, when you have a Glenn Campbell, someone like a Glenn Campbell, well, Dean Torrance is still here. So he just turned 85 on March 10th. Um, and Mike is turning 84 today.
yeah. So happy birthday to him.
Um, it's fascinating to me to be able to supplement
Sure.
um, things when you're going back. One of the things that I'm sensitive to, like if I've had a subscriber for the beginning, like we've had subscribers since as long as I've been doing the magazine, which is August of '93, who've always had subscriptions. So part of me is like, is that person going to feel ripped off if I go back and take something from an earlier
Sure.
edition, even though 2011's 14 years ago?
Yeah.
Are they going to feel shortchanged or shorted because I'm taking something they've already read once?
Sure.
So that's why it was important to me to present it uh, differently, as focused on to have everything kind of brought into one place. And again, the idea I like is that the Brian Wilson Productions issue, Brian gets older in every photo and in every.
Yeah.
So that was the other thing. I decided that when I did the first one, I said, okay, 63 here, and then Glenn Campbell was 65, so that'll be the last one. And then I want Brian from 65 on that cover. And then the summer edition, like I said, will be kind of a stopgap. And then the fall edition will be Brian older, and then older than from probably like 67, 68. And then the winter will be an early '70s Brian.
Okay.
And so it's gonna so you can take the four issues, and it's going to be Brian getting older, and
Yeah.
it's going to be a consistent look. The colors will be different on the next two, part two, later stuff, but it's all going to tie together visually, and it's just to celebrate. ESQ at its root, regardless of what I'm working on, it's a celebration of this music.
Yeah.
It's incredible to me. If you've ever looked down a well, you can't see the bottom, and it's just you don't know how deep it is.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what this has been like. I had no idea when I agreed to be a part of ESQ in August of well, I guess July of 1993, that there was such potential to write about so much and to meet and know the people who were involved,
Yeah.
uh, and each one of their stories. ESQ really, if nothing else, is a publication that tells stories. And Brian not touring anymore. There's also I'm hoping that he sees this magazine.
Sure.
I mean, I know that he's seen ESQ. I know, but I'm really hoping uh, the people there in his lives when the magazine arrives in the mailbox that they'll say, Brian, check this out. You won't believe
Yeah.
what's in here, and maybe get. I would love, I don't need to know. I don't
Yeah.
know, but I just would hope that his kids would see it, they would check it out, they would go, Dad, I didn't know you were. What is this? And even if it's a 1 minute conversation, then I will have done my job.
Yeah.
That if there's something that they get out of it.
Well, in terms of value, not just the Beach Boys, but that he has other stuff that he's connected to that holds value that he might have moved on from. Mentioning something like Danny or any of these other people you've talked to, it's not like it's 5 years ago that this stuff happened or 10 years ago. It's 60 plus years ago. So it's very hard in general. I know Sharon mentioned, I don't remember dates that well, but I was there. I experienced it. And there are certain questions where you talk about Run Around Lover, where you're like, oh, these session dates were at this time, or these vocals were these people. Do you remember working with them? What was that like? And she said, oh, I don't remember these people. But for you, doing that, how much of you do you gauge that choice of asking specific questions from a specific period years ago versus just being a meticulous researcher and wanting to ask these questions based off the abundance of material you have?
Well, I always try to get as much information as I can, but what I find in my interviews is having a set questions where you want to ask about songs, but also I love telling the human connectivity story.
Yeah,
Um, so I often find myself asking, I maybe ask about a record, but I will, based on the answer that I get, will find the human connectivity part of the answer and then try to come on. So it may not be a question that I have in front of me that I've already prepared, but I like to take, if I ask, like I asked Dave Nolan about, recording the Witch Stand, what happened to the Witch Stand? And I have that question, and then he says, I'm not ever sure what happened to the master. It was really great living next to Brian. And then so then we get talking about Brian's Grand Prix and how Dave was there when the dealership called and said your Grand Prix's ready, and the two of them were giving the dealership a hard time over the phone. That I love as much as anything else
sure.
because that's the friendship thing. And if I can get that out of a conversation with anyone, that's what I really truly love. I'll give you a Beach Boys example of that. When I was doing the Friends edition of ESQ, which was September of 20, no, spring of 2018, to align with the 50th anniversary of that album, I was interviewing Mike Love, and I think he talks about this to a degree in his book as well. But we were talking about how the Beach Boys played the UNICEF benefit concert in Paris in December of '67. And after that, and in the front row was George Harrison and John Lennon of the Beatles with Maharishi. after the con, and they met him, but afterwards, Mike and Marlon Brando went off to some party in London. They got on a plane and went off to some party in London. That sounds like it might have been a fun party. But it's the next day that Dennis Wilson, who's still in Paris, calls Mike and says, "Hey, Maharishi wants to give us mantras and teach us transcendental meditation. Come back." Mike does that. To this day, Mike practices transcendental
Yeah.
meditation. So I said to Mike in the interview, "Mike, is that the most important phone call you've ever received in your life?" And he said, "Yeah." See, so that to me is what I love to do. I love to remind these guys of the important parts of what they really did for one another. I mean, there's plenty of books, there's plenty of documentation about their historic issues
Yeah.
because they've got more than their share. But I really like connecting and reminding them of what made them great from the human foundational part.
Yes.
And even last summer's edition, that was focused on the documentary and the Genesis book, in my interview with Mike, there was two interviews with Mike and Al and Frank Marshall because I got herded through like cattle during the press junket when I did my Zoom with them. It was Mike, Frank Marshall, and Al, and I can't remember. It was I think maybe 10 minutes tops. It was very short, and it's just like, and depending on how long they talked, I didn't get very many questions in. So
Yeah.
I was able to follow up on the phone with Mike and Al, and I was able to send an email of additional questions to Frank Marshall, and was able to get them all answered. But in my conversation with Mike, because of the way the documentary ended at Paradise Cove, and I mean, the shot right before the Paradise Cove is they ask Mike, "What would you say to Brian?" And he gets teary and he says,
Yeah.
"I love him." So I asked Mike because all of a sudden stories were popping up that they might do something again together. Even though Brian wasn't touring, there was this like Bruce had done an interview that he was hinting at maybe there'd be something they could do with Brian. And Al was talking about this song "Islands in the Sun," which I believe will come out on his second solo album. And he called it to follow up to Kokomo. And I talked to Mike and I said, there's all this kind of activity talking about you guys getting back together. And Mike said to me, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, I'm not really that interested in getting together musically. I just want to spend time with my cousin.
Yeah.
And and that to me, at the end of the day, is all that matters. They went into the world. They changed the music. They. I mean, that's why you and I are sitting here talking about it
Sure.
now. But I'm really a fan of telling the part of the story that has everything to do with the relationship and the familial element of it to show people you can find anywhere where maybe the one said something disparaging about the other. Where, I mean, there's even interviews where Brian has said, "I don't like Mike. It's the day of the week, it's,
Yeah.
whatever mood he was in." That you can always find something like that. I've imparted this story to a few people. I just think it's great. I was backstage with Brian at a show, and I don't. It was the late. It was 20. It was after 2017ish, 2016, 2017, and I could feel this. They weren't on stage yet, and I could feel we weren't talking. I could feel Mike's presence. I felt Mike's presence, and Al, and at another point, and it could have been a different show because it's been a while. But I was talking. It was this was 20 like November 2015 now because I was sitting with Al in the catering room. Brian wasn't in there, but most of the band was, and we were just talking, and I said, "Well, I really hope that you guys, meaning everybody, manage to get together next year for the 50th anniversary of Pet Sounds and do like one show together, like the Beach Boys do Pet Sounds in its entirety, and where
Yeah.
everybody can get together." And Al, unsolicited from me, just said to the room, "Well, Mike, everybody hear that? Everybody hear that? And he looked at me and he said, Brian wants Mike on stage.
Hmm.
And that told me a lot.
Yeah.
That regardless of anything else outside those individuals, they really do love one another. I traveled to DC. Mike was playing the Kennedy Center, and I told Mike about feeling his presence with Brian, but I wasn't feeling Brian backstage with Mike.
Yeah.
I didn't feel Brian's presence. But I'll tell you, I went and took my seat. The show starts. Mike comes on stage, and the second Mike took the stage and started singing, I felt Brian's
Hmm.
presence. But that's just me. That doesn't mean that's what it is. But that was my experience, and I thought it was really beautiful. I thought it was meaningful.
You sort of touched upon it, so I guess it may be a rehash of it, so apologies in advance. With this issue or these next few issues of the Brian Wilson solo productions arc that you're writing about, what do you hope people, whether it be fans of the group or fans of music or just people in general, get from this chunk of stuff?
A deeper appreciation of Brian Wilson's musical value, and just to be able to go, and hopefully be able to say, oh gosh, this was going on while Brian was working on this Beach Boys album. This was going on while Brian was working on this Beach Boys album. And one of the questions that I've gotten asked in doing different interviews about these is that, do you think it bothered Brian that these other things that he was doing weren't hit records? I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know if because they didn't. I mean, Jan and Dean's Surf City went to number one,
Yeah.
and Surfing USA only went to number three, which pissed Murray off pretty bad. But and Jan and Dean wanted Surfing USA,
Hmm.
which is the whole crazy part of it. Because they had met Chuck Berry because they had been touring longer, and they knew they had met Chuck because they played shows together,
Yeah.
etc. But so again, we don't know. But again, I don't think it was necessarily. I can't imagine Brian worked on anything thinking this is going to amount to nothing.
Yeah.
I don't think at any time. I think every time he worked on something, whether it be Beach Boys or Sharon Marie or the Survivors or whatever it might be, I think Brian's intention would always be to do something of quality. That
Sure.
that this would be, hopefully this will do well. Kind of, if I could say safely that that might have been what he was thinking, that I think that's fair to say that he would think, oh, I hope that this is successful.
Sure.
Once he got it finished and once he listened to it and went, hmm, cool. I think
Yeah.
So I would like to believe that. And the fact that if stuff didn't chart, was he disappointed? Possibly. I
Yeah.
know we do know historically that he was disappointed that Pet Sounds didn't do better than it did. So I'm sure there was a part of him that may have been affected uh, by the lack of success. But my gosh, imagine if all these other things that he had done were successful too.
Sure.
Then that really would have caused a ripple and a problem with the Beach Boys because
Exactly.
they would have been more like, Brian, but I just had a big hit over here. Like,
Yeah.
I got to go back and do it. No, no, you stay
You stay with
right.
us. Yeah.
So, I mean, there was even the story with Vicky, and during that interview where she said Brian just brought her in for a session one day, not to sing or anything like that, just to come by with him to go to a Beach Boy session. And that when she walked in the door, they all looked at her like, "What is she doing here?" I mean, just because it was like their time to record and they wanted to get it done. And I don't. So there became. I don't know if resentment is a fair word. It's a strong word. I don't know if it's fair, but everybody, you talk to any one of the Beach Boys, and they will all almost all tell you in one way or another. Everyone knew that Brian had it
Yeah.
very early on. They knew that Brian had something special. Not, oh, he's going to go write a number one hit, or oh, we're going to, in a year from now, we're going to have, we're going to put out 12 albums in 4 years,
Sure.
or anything like that. But he transformed modern popular music, and he did it with a number of writers. And when you say Brian solo productions, I don't think of them as solo. I think like if he did something with Gary Usher, or if he did something with like Sharon Marie's a great example. He produces and arranges that, but he and Mike write the songs, which I thought was another great part of the story.
Yeah.
Was Run Around Lover, Thinking About You Baby, or Brian Wilson and Mike Love compositions. And there's not really so like, oh, Brian production is a Sharon Marie. And it's like, well, wait a minute. This was a team up.
Yeah.
This was Brian and Mike working together. So I'm going to get into that with this Songwriter Hall of Fame thing that I'm going to do, because this is, we tend, because of Brian's incredible effect on
Yeah.
popular music, we tend to just think about Brian as the catalyst
Yeah.
for all the activity and all the success. When there's a significant proponent there, and Mike, and that that success was twofold. Gary Usher, really helped get them on the right path. But it was everybody. It was Roger Christian. It was Gary Usher. It would later become Tony Asher for a brief period. It would become Van Dyke Parks for a moment. Um, but that the consistency through it all is Mike Love, and how easy is the story that in June of '68, Mike goes and grabs Brian and says, "Let's go for a walk down the beach together and just hang out." Which is why I touched on earlier that Mike just wants to go see Brian and spend time with him.
Yeah.
that that moment in time where the two of them just go for a walk on the beach, they come back and they've written Do It Again. So yeah, I think that was one of those moments in time where Mike was very fortunate just to get that moment with Brian to kind of create that magic again. But artistically magical? No, of course not. But it's a great song. It's a great
Yeah.
song. So, you have to just take everything at face value. You have to, just understand what everything is, and if you're a nerd like me and you really want to get into it, go down the rabbit hole, then you can, but what I encourage everyone to do on any level of fan of the Beach Boys, or any group for that matter, is find out as much as you can, not just about one member or the one member's perspective, but try everything you can to understand all the perspectives. Because if you're in a room, and we'll use the Beach Boys as the example here, if you've got, so we'll just use the Pet Sound Sessions as an example. At that time, there were six of them because Bruce was a member.
Sure.
You have six perspectives because there's six people in the room. You probably have seven or eight perspectives depending on who's in the booth. So that's what people don't really, I don't think they spend enough, not that you have to spend time thinking about that type of thing, but it's important to consider that.
Before we end today, David, and again, thank you so much for doing this. I want to end on a little segment that I occasionally bring out if I'm talking to people in sort of the Beach Boys sort of hemisphere, and that's called All of This or That. And I'll throw out a few things. You have to choose either this or that. So if you're ready, we'll get going.
Sure, let's do it.
And I'll preface by saying I tried my best to make it as even as possible, revolving around some of the people mentioned in
Okay.
these booklets. So the first one being Bob and Sherry or Bob and Vicky.
I guess Bob and Sherry, because Bob and Vicky didn't happen.
uh, the Honeys or Jan and Dean.
Oh, Jan and Dean. Jan and Dean.
Sharon Marie or Glenn Campbell.
This is not easy for such different reasons. Good Lord. Sure, Marie.
And last but certainly not least, Guess I'm Dumb or Run Around Lover.
Guess I'm dumb.
I'll give you the time now to say where you can find ESQ, not just in terms of where you can buy it, but where you can find news regarding the publication.
Sure. ESquarterly.com. So that's ESQUARTERLY.com. We have a Facebook page. I mean, if you just Google whatever search engine you're on, you just type in Endless Summer Quarterly, it'll come up. And then if you want to know a little bit about the magazine, you can click on the About button. If you click on the magazine subscription button, there's a testimonial video there with Brian Wilson, Mike Love, Al Jardine, Bruce Johnston, and myself, where they endorse and they tell. I'll let them speak for me in
Yeah.
terms of just watch that video and you will see if the surviving Beach Boys telling you to subscribe to the magazine's not enough, then I don't know what will get you to
Yeah.
subscribe. Um, but and then there's the ESQ store. If you want to kind of understand what we've done, because you and I have talked about a few things, people can go to the ESQ store and they can. There's a search button. You can type in something you're looking for, and we tag every issue, so certain kinds of issues would pop up. If you want to go through and take your time and go through the whole back catalog, I mean, we've been publishing since 1993, so there's a lot there. There's a lot that have sold out over time. Um, and you're the first person I'll tell this publicly to. We're looking at digital.
Uh,
We're getting we understand the value of digital, and so that's something we're looking into and exploring. And we hope by the third quarter of this year that we'll have something to offer. I don't know yet because we're still exploring it, but that's kind of our goal. We want to be
awesome.
able to offer because I think that's a concern worldwide, and things are changing around us daily with different things as they relate to the world. I think it might make it easier for some people to just get an electronic
Sure.
PDF file to read. So that's something we're looking into. But that's really the about button, the ESQ store button, the magazine subscription, and there are VIP memberships available where they subscribe, they get the regular subscription, plus they get to do Zoom with me, and they get other goodies in the mail.
Yeah.
So is that?
Well, I know you also have on YouTube, on the ESQ YouTube channel,
Yes,
the Good Vibration show where you and apologies, I
Ron,
forget your
Ron Vaccaro.
yes, yes, and you discuss the issue and other information like that as well.
Yeah, and I'm trying to branch out with that show. I just did. Ron was busy. He traveling, so I did a two-part video with Rick and Perry Cox, who
Yes.
Rick Cox owns the Dennis Wilson's original surfboard that was on the Surf and Safari and Surfer Girl album covers. And so we did a really interesting because they were there the day at Paradise Cove for the documentary. So that was just a wonderful thing to do with the two of them. And I'm going to be doing more of those with kind of peripheral
Sure.
figures, try to bring them in and let different people tell their stories and bring fans. In fact, we should have you on.
I'm ready and able whenever that may be. I don't know if I'm at the level of people who own beach boards that were owned by Beach
But you're
Boys,
a
but
fan,
I am a fan. But
so that's the
I will
criteria.
I will accept that nonetheless. Again, good sir, thank you for doing this. Thank you for taking the time to share this story. I know it's been a while when we first reached out to put this together, but this was a great treat to read something that I didn't know necessarily all the details, but to learn about a period so far ago is always a great treat. And it's always done expertly, so thank you.
Oh, thank you.
All us out there, if you didn't enjoy this, which I don't know who wouldn't enjoy this, do us a favor. Check out the back issues. They're great. I caught up and it was excellent. Follow on social media for them. But also, if you enjoy this episode, do us a favor. Subscribe on YouTube. Follow on the audio platforms. Click that thumbs up, like button, all that fun jazz, wherever it is down below. Do us a favor by following us on Instagram at Nolan Cart Night Show. On Twitter, Nolan Cart Night. In the words of Johnny Carson, the Dean of Shows, certainly like this one. I bid you all a heartfelt good night. Till next time, take care.